Hello, welcome back. It is Wednesday, 1 p.m., December 16th, Pacific Time. I have a fantastic and wonderful guest with me today. She will be joining us momentarily, but I have the great Kerry Shiels from Cotebonneville making some amazing wine. Let's get her in here and see that she's just joined. Hope you guys are all having a fantastic day. It is a wonderful Wednesday, and Napa just got the shutdown again, so hello.
Hi, how are you?
Can't complain. Just got the official verdict that Napa is going to be shutting down a little bit again, so yeah, it is what it is, but 2020, it's almost over. Just kind of hanging on, hanging on for the ride. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's such an honor and a pleasure to see you and have you as a guest today. Great to see you. And for those of our viewers who aren't familiar with yourself or with your brand, can you please give everyone a quick introduction about yourself and the brand?
Yeah, my name's Kerry Shiels. I'm the winemaker at Cotebonneville. We're the estate winery of Dubrul Vineyard, one of the Grand Cru sites in Washington. And it was planted by my parents in 1992. And so we've been making classically styled wines that really express our sense of place ever since.
Fantastic. Cool. So first off, Kerry, how are you doing this year? I mean, 2020 has been challenging to say the least. Mm-hmm. It's come with its fair share of a plethora of fun surprises.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Right. Well, we've been shut down a lot actually. So, but at the same time, I think for me personally, there have been so many things to be grateful for this year. And the big two on the top of my list are the people who have supported us when we've been shut down and couldn't come visit. So I have to start with a thank you to all of the people, everybody who has supported small business, everybody who's supported us, everybody who's gone direct to the wineries. We are super grateful and so thankful. So thank you. And then the other thing, I'm just so grateful for the vineyard. Like, I was up running again this morning, and the vines don't know that it's COVID. I mean, they've been socially distancing since 1992. They got this thing down.
Right.
Whenever there's chaos in the world, whenever there's social unrest, whenever there's political turmoil, the vines don't recognize that. They recognize what's happening with the weather. They recognize the nutrient status. I mean, it's so grounding to realize that it's timeless, it's classic. And I think this is one of those other reasons that we love wine, is that it does transport us to those places that are relatively untouched by the events going on in the world.
For sure. Mother Nature will always find a way. A lot of people have been kind of staying in place and trying to work from home, or they've had to completely rearrange their work-life balance. And one thing that I've been following you with what you've been doing this year is, this year you started a Let's Follow This Cabernet Vine, and you check in every now and then with like the same vine and see what's going on. You go for a morning run, and then you're like, oh, cool, now it's going through veraison now, and a lot of interesting things. There's always a great way to look at things and always have a perspective of, this is what's happening, and life is still going on, and grapes are still growing, and there's plenty of things to be happy about. So yeah, I really enjoyed that whole series. So
thank you. We've talked about doing that for years, but this year has been, with no travel, I have finally had the time and the consistency to say I can do it every week from that same vine. And it's, even for me, it's crazy to go back and watch how quickly the vineyard changes every week, especially at the beginning of the season where you've got nothing, and then you've got a little bit of green, a lot of green, and then you have buds, and it's where wine really starts. But I think so often we talk about the wine and what we do in the cellar, and it all starts in the vineyard. So it's good I'm glad you appreciated that and had fun with it.
Yeah. was super cool. Actually, something that I've actually always wanted to do is take a photograph of a vine after it's been trimmed, and then take a picture the same time of day throughout the year, and then see how much growth happens. So it can be put into like one of those fast, you ever seen those the still shot of like the person takes the picture every single day, and then the hair gets long and it gets cut all of a sudden. It's like that 365 days in a vineyard, but from the exact same perspective every single day from the same time. But yeah, it's a really interesting thing, and a lot of people got to live vicariously through you and your experiment with looking at the vine this year. So thank you for doing that. It was very very cool. I dug it.
Awesome.
Yeah. So last year I came to visit you and your mother, and met you at Dubrul Vineyard, and then we kind of got a chance to walk around the property and see what was going on. A lot of cool things there. What do you enjoy most about working with the Dubrul Vineyard, and what are some of the challenges that it gives you from year to year?
Well, I think one of having worked in and lived in various other parts of the world of wine, I think it's really unique that in the Yakima Valley in Washington State, we have 45 acres that we can grow all at a very high level. We can grow Riesling and Chardonnay and Bordeaux varietals and Syrah, and it's really fun to be, I mean, it's one of the most exciting things, I think, to be able to do all of those things and then carry them through into the winery, and especially because we still sell 3/4 of our fruit. The winemaking on all those things is really little, but it's so cool to be able to do that, because every variety, every vintage presents its own challenges and nuances. But again, it's really, I don't know if joy is the right word, but it's a good one to say. Like, when I sit down and think about it, like, there are not many places in the world you can do that. And there are so many people that make Cabernet, and there's so many wonderful, wonderful examples of Riesling. And to be able to do both of those is just, it's pretty special, and it's pretty awesome when I think about it.
For sure. Thinking about other places in the world that grow Riesling and Cabernet that close to one another, or even from the same vineyard, your limits are really, really, really short on being able to do that from the same vineyard within the same context. Typically, it's the Bordeaux varietals, or it's Chardonnay and Cabernet. Chardonnay can take a little bit of heat. Sometimes Cabernet and Viognier, but Riesling and Cabernet, it makes you pause and say, can it be done? And clearly it can. And you've got to find those right plots of land that just are just wonderful and perfect. I mean, I've always said the greatest way to make some of the most beautiful wine is to find the perfect plot of land that is perfectly suited for that varietal, figure out all that ahead of time, plant, and then walk away and let Mother Nature do its thing, and let it take its course. So it's really remarkable that you can have a vineyard being able to have Chardonnay, Riesling, Cabernet, and all these other varietals, because in the context of the world of wine, people don't necessarily think of Riesling and Cabernet being in the same vineyard, and that's one of the really unique things about Washington State is it has that ability. And I think people, once they begin to figure out this more and more about Washington, how its unique sites are able to make such beautiful, expressive wine from a site that captures everything where it came from, its identity, its sincerity of that site, of that source. People, start to gravitate towards it, quite more.
Yeah. I think that's one of the challenges of Washington in general, is that it's not simple. Yeah. There's diversity of site, there's diversity of grape variety, there's diversity of style, and that makes it challenging for some people, because what does a region and a grape mean in the world is, if it's monolithic, it's easy. Yeah. But the regions that are really interesting, like Burgundy's incredibly challenging. It's incredibly complex, but that's what makes it compelling, and that's what makes it interesting. And I think the more and more people learn about Washington and Yakima, they're going to just realize that many of the same things apply, that it's nuanced and there's subtleties and there's always more to learn about it, and it's just endlessly fascinating and delicious at the same time.
For sure. The whole package.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I recently published part 2 of the Washington Reports last week, and your wines did very, very well. One in specific was the 3rd ever release of the 2012 Dubrul Cabernet Sauvignon. It was just absolutely stunning. I was tasting through all the wines, and I had a pace. I was at a pace for the day. I was like, cool, I'm going to get this many wines done. Like, I was feeling good about it. And all of a sudden I got to that wine and my entire day just collapsed. I was like, I'm going to spend like the next hour to 3 hours just smelling this and like clear the schedule. It's just like, what's going on here? How did this happen? How did Kerry do this? Talk to me about all the selections and all the processes that go through making the that wine.
Well, all the wines we make at Cotebonneville are really with the goal of expressing a singular sense of place. So every year we make the Carriage House and the Cote, which are different geologies. They're about 50 yards apart in the vineyard, but the soil profile is so different, the aspects so different, that the vines grow differently, they taste different. So again, when I go back to my Burgundy touch point, it's very much that kind of concept that this part of the hill goes in this wine and this part of the hill goes in this wine. And our hillside is a basalt promontory that was upthrust. This picture behind me is the very top of it. But over on the wind blows from west to east, and there's some soil deposits down here. It dips off a little bit on the east, and there's a couple short rows, and the soil profile is different as you go across the hill. And sometimes, in some years, there's just those short rows on the east end, they just pop, and they'd say, wow. And when they do that, that's when we make Cabernet, because it's not our best 2 barrels. It's not a reserve. It's not a barrel selection. It's not a winery thing. Very little of what we do at Cotebonneville is a winery thing. It's always a vineyard thing. And when that part of the vineyard, just sometimes it's exceptional, but it's similar to the rest of the blend. So it goes into our Cote and makes Cote better. And sometimes it just says, you know what, I want to be a standalone wine. And it's fun because having done it a couple times, I watch those rows in the fermenter and we keep them separate. And even during fermentation, I'm always tasting like every day when I'm doing the punch downs, it's like, okay, what flavors are we getting? What, if we keep this lot separate, what 2 barrels, what barrels would we put it in? Because it's a 2-barrel lot. It's a 1-ton ferment. It's not a lot. Yeah. It's a tiny little bit of grapes and fruit. But when it's special, it's also a lot of work. So
yeah, sure.
If it's not going to be special enough, we don't keep it separate. But it's always a fun project when we can. So
yeah, it's less than 500 bottles. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like 45 cases usually.
Gotcha. Cool.
So whatever that is times 12. I'm a retired engineer. I don't do that math anymore.
Right. I want to ask you to recite the first fundamental theorem of calculus today. So.
Thank you.
Speaking of Dubrul Vineyard, we have some wines to try, and I'm getting quite thirsty. So let's go ahead and start with the 2017 estate bottled Dubrul Vineyard Chardonnay.
Okay.
So this is what we've got lined up for today. It's a beautiful bottle. Why don't you go ahead and introduce this wine and talk a little bit about it?
All right. So the Chardonnay, we've got that basalt promontory, and there's a little bit of a cutout on the west side. And there's actually, most of our hill is south facing, but this spot is north facing. So it's significantly cooler, which is why we planted Chardonnay there, to go back to your point that you plant the right varietals in the right places. And we had been selling the fruit for years and years, and because it was 10 years between when we planted the vineyard and started the winery. And a couple years after that, it was kind of the ABC, anything but Chardonnay, and nobody liked Chardonnay. And my mom's like, I want to make Chardonnay. I love Chardonnay. And people were like, nobody likes Chardonnay. Chardonnay's manipulatable. Chardonnay tastes like oak and butter, and it doesn't taste like fruit, and nobody wants to drink it. And mom's like, I love white Burgundy. I want to make something like that. I don't want to make white oak butter juice. I want to make classically styled, beautiful Chardonnay. And I think it's one of the testaments of what we do with these classically styled wines. We don't chase trends. We don't say, "Ooh, here's a bright, shiny new object that I want to make this year and be all experimental." Those classics endure for a reason. Then always love white Burgundy because if it's balanced, if there's finesse, if it's got texture and fruit, why wouldn't you love that? And why wouldn't you love it every year? And so we make about 200 cases of this in a vintage. And I've been doing it since 2004. And mom got really mad when I put her on allocation for our Chardonnay a couple of years ago.
I bet.
So
I can see her. It's like, wait, like I started the brand, we planted the vineyard, and now you're putting me on allocation? Like,
we had a couple of real short years in the vineyard, and you know, it's not like I can just go buy more fruit from somebody else. If we're short, I don't go to our neighbors and ask for a couple extra tons. We just, in a year like that, we just make less. So,
smart.
So, yeah.
Smart. Yeah, it's funny how the trend of ABC kind of came. I think it's starting to go away now. I think at one point there was just too much Chardonnay in the world that didn't have really a sense of place. Mm-hmm. Anytime anyone would say like, "Oh, I'm ABC, I can't drink Chardonnay," I'm like, really? If I give you like, you know, Le Clos, Grand Cru Chablis, you're gonna turn it down? If I give you like Cru Blanc de Blanc, you're gonna turn it down? Like, no. There's, you know, Chardonnay.
You're really not gonna drink Montrachet? Come on.
Exactly, right? I mean, come on, yeah. So it's one of those things where you look at it and you say, you know, you do like Chardonnay, you like really good Chardonnay, and you've got a good palate. Good for you, but you're going to spend some money. So it's great to be able to have, you know, a beautiful wine like this that shows sense of place. And I love the fact that it's slightly kind of murky, like unfiltered, that unfined, like has that depth that you just don't get from you know, finding or filtering the wine. You have this sincerity about you can tell it's still a warmer spot, but it gets cooler at night because it still has nice acidity, and then the oak is perfectly laid on top, where it's not heavy-handed, where it's just everything in its place, and it's all helping each other fully express itself, and it's beautiful. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good stuff.
I feel like one of the things that we strive to do, and you express so wonderfully, is our wines are about balance. They're about finesse, and they're about elegance, because power is easy. Oak is easy. Restraint and elegance is much more challenging.
Sure.
And yet I find that those are the wines that I like to drink. And that's the beauty of being small and family owned, is we make the wines that we want to drink.
For sure. You know, thinking back to what you said about the Dubrul Cabernet, you said, you know, it doesn't happen every year. Like you know when something is happening, you say this is really special. It reminded me of a phrase that Philippe Pascal once said. He makes wines for two estates on the planet, Chateau Margaux and Inglenook in Napa. And he said, when I'm trying to make the Grand Vin, like the top wine, he said, it's like I'm panning for gold. You just are working the ground, you're working with everything going on, but sometimes when you're panning, I might find a diamond or a ruby. Do I throw these away? No, because I know they're special and unique. I understand their value and how precious they are. So I'll take them and I'll put them over here. Mm-hmm. And that's when the magic happens. And I thought about that. And I was like, wow, that's something really special, because that means that you're like, everyone's in tune with what's happening on the ground, to the vines, to the grapes. And when they notice something that's that important and that's special, they can take that set aside and elevated and become something truly remarkable. Yeah. But yeah, delicious stuff. Cool. Any other things we'd like to talk about with the Chardonnay before we move on to the Cotebonneville?
I think both of these, since you brought up the fact that the Cabernet was from 2012 and this is 2017, 17, well, I think I want to take a second to talk about vintage because
Very important.
there were years where somebody wanted to review our Chardonnay and they're like, but we want this vintage. So we need this vintage of Chardonnay. And I'm like, but it's not bottled yet. Yeah. And so we can't send it to you because I can't send you a wine that's not complete and finished. We're not comparing apples to oranges. We do a really extended Surly's aging on this wine. One of the reasons that it can be unfined and unfiltered is that it does go through a complete malolactic fermentation. I mean, it's full primary, full ML, so it's not going to re-ferment in the bottle. But then to get that full textural component of the lees and to get the stability and the clarity, it takes a year and a half. So it's one of the reasons that our Chardonnay always looks a vintage behind or two, but really it's just because the way we make it, all of our wines we do set up to age. And so but that means they're that much better and more expressive by the time they get to use. So it's
Sure.
So I feel like for some people, 17 Chardonnay is older, and at this point, and for us, it's just starting.
Well, I mean, think about in context of Burgundy. I mean, who's drinking 19s right now?
Winemakers out of the barrel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, very good point. So nice. I just want to sit there and like just smell it.
Okay, you can. That's fine.
Delicious. I enjoy wineries that take the time to release the wine once it's ready. You know, that was one of the thoughts that I had when writing up the note for the 2012 Dubrul Cabernet. Is you'd let it sit in barrel for half a decade. Like, what kind of investment is that for a winery? Like, when people realize what they're getting, like 2012, it's old. No, this is current release. It's 2020 now. Yes, the bottle is about 8 years old, but here's the thing: it sat for it sat in barrel for 2 years, and then in bottle for 5 years. I'm sorry. So it had plenty of time to come around and finally find what I call that kind of harmonizing tune, and everything is kind of gelled together. And once that happens, you have magic. And this is one of the reasons why I think Rioja as a whole is so great, because they can take that time in bottle and barrel and let that go. Like, if there's ever an earthquake in Rioja, my God. you think Champagne's like crazy, like caves and caves and caves, but like it's just and thinking about the time, the investments to age something like that, it shows that you truly care and you've taken the time, and it's something truly remarkable. So I will be purchasing a bottle tomorrow if they're still available. Yeah.
I have a bottle set aside for you. Don't worry.
No, you can't do that. But yeah, I want to get into this 2009 Cotebonneville, because I have not tried this wine yet. I came last year and tried current leases, and then this is something I've been looking forward to all week when you told me that you would be sending these bottles, and then when I looked at the vintage, it's like, cool. I have not tried it. So I'm very excited about this.
Fun. Well, and this is not current, but I decided to send this vintage for two reasons. One, because I knew you hadn't tasted it, and I thought it would be fun to do something different. And two, it hit me so I started making wine when I was 13 as part of a science project, because somehow it seemed logical in 7th grade to make wine when in science class. I don't know.
For sure.
But I came home full time. I mean, I've been associated with a family business since we founded it and as a kid, but I came home full time in 2009. So in a way, this is my first complete vintage at Cotebonneville. And it hit me last year that I'd been home right before harvest. Actually, it hit me that I'd been home for about a decade. And when you go back to the concept of taking the time, I think it's a very notable thing to say that, because it doesn't, you can learn the winemaking almost faster. You go work at a big winery, you buy grapes all over the place, and you can get the Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 repetitions or 10,000 hours of practice. You can get that in faster in some ways in the winery. And the vineyard it's so much more nuanced and complicated, and you can't, I mean, there are definitely principles that carry between, but there's just something about grape growing, and especially when your goal is to express a sense of place, getting to know a sense of place. I mean, it's not any different than people. You can meet somebody and have a great connection and be instant best friends, but that's a different relationship than you will have having been great friends for 20 years. And there's just something about that depth of relationship, and I think it really does show through in the wines. And it's something that I find influencing me more and more. And the longer I work with one place, the more I really appreciate how important it is to work with one place and have that consistency and really get to know all of the subtleties and nuances. So that's why I sent you the 9.
Yeah, it was beautiful. In my head, I was thinking, oh, it's probably gonna be like this, and it far exceeds my expectations. There's the one thing I love about this, like it still has like really good acidity, but the tannin, it slowly kind of builds and it grips, and then it slowly releases. And this has that beautiful mineral tension, but like the tannin, it's not, it's more than a decade old now. The fruit is still very lively and expressive. But I mean, I feel that we've opened this a decade too early, because there's still plenty of life left in it, and it's still just absolutely gorgeous. It's wonderful.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's showing well now. I think a lot of times these wines, the Cote especially, at about 10 years is when they start getting to the point where I want to open them. But they're definitely not peaking. I would agree with that concept.
No, not at all. It has like you there's like that first, like it's more like a rumor of like maturity. It's like you can tell it's age, but like if someone told me this is 11 years old, I'm like, this is like 5 to 7. It's like 11, like crazy. Who is this? But like there's like the purity of fruit is still there, and you have like this. I could tell at one point it was more like blackberry, but now it's like black raspberry, where like the as fruit ages, it kind of like almost like downgrades into like the next fruit slot. So like in context of like, very ripe, mature, you have like the blue fruits and then the black fruits and then the red fruits. So I could tell at one point this is like ripe black fruit, but now it's, kind of sliding into like that black raspberry, where it's like, it's red, but it's like shifted dark. And I can tell exactly where this is going to go. And it's just stunning. It still has a beautiful frame of focus, and the purity of expression of fruit is still very much alive. With wines that typically get about that 10-year mark, you start to see this kind of homogenization of fruit just kind of becoming, it's dark berried or it's just black fruit. There's still defining features of this wine that it's wonderful. Well done.
Well, thank you. So yeah, Cote is always, for those of you who don't know, it's always a blend of Cabernet and Merlot from our hillside vines on that on the basalt promontory, and it's those vines are pretty consistent year in and year out in what they produce. So it's very consistent in that blend, and it's fun to see the vintage variations because it's always the same rows. But 9 was a pretty great vintage in Washington. That's the beauty of Yakima. They're all great. I mean, even if we have a cold one like 11, it's still warmer than Bordeaux. In a hot year, like 15 is still cooler than Napa. So, I mean, there's no reason that every year in Washington can't be great.
Of course. Yeah. But so the thing is, like, the way climate change is affecting the world and global warming, there's plenty to be aware of moving forward.
Yeah, I think one of the advantages.
I just want to see and smell this. It's great.
I'm just going to talk about climate change, and you're focused on the wine. I think the good news for the Yakima Valley and Washington wine in particular is a friend of mine did a lot of climate change work in his master's thesis, and because of our situation where we're in between the Rocky Mountains and the Blue Mountains, and the Cascades, we're kind of really protected from a lot of these major weather events. So it means that we continue to be incredibly consistent year in and year out. But it also means that although, I mean, I don't want to say that climate change, there's a place on the planet that won't be affected, but if you look at the places that are going to have larger swings more quickly, we are not that place. We are going to continue to be very consistent, pretty consistent, and the projections for us changing and dramatic changes in vintages are less than other parts of the world. So I think that's part of the reason you see so much investment coming into Washington.
I concur. That, and also Washington State's, Columbia Valley particularly has a pretty significant diurnal shift, which gives you that all the heat index you need during the day in the sunlight, but also the brilliant cool nights that bring with it a longevity from lifting acids and all these great things that ultimately give and frame the structure a beautiful balance. So.
And the other thing that's important in the Columbia Valley, more or less depending on the site you're at, especially in our site, where you have so much basalt, which is the underlying bedrock of the entire region. Like we are on top of a basalt upthrust. The more volcanic basaltic soil you have, the more it keeps that acidity in the wines. And I think basalt is a really, really important component. I mean, there's books that have been written about volcanic soils and how critical this is and how distinctive and unique the wines are. And there's a lot of basalt in this region, and especially in our vineyard, which is important.
For sure, absolutely. It takes It takes miserable soil to make happy grapes.
I feel like, and this is relevant to 2020, grapes are like people.
Oh, for sure.
If there's too much soil, if there's too much water, if there's too much nitrogen, if their life is easy, then they grow really big and really fat and really lazy, and they don't have a lot of complexity and they don't have any intensity. But if you make them struggle, if you plant them like in this block here where there's no soil and they really have to work, what comes out is complexity, intensity, it's fruit, it's great stories, and we're all going to have better stories and be more complex, interesting people after 2020. So this is a good thing. For sure. Yeah. I mean, the Bordelais said that it takes poor soil to make miserable. It takes miserable grapes to make great wine, is what they said. So you plant them in these crazy rocky Bordeaux soils, and you end up with crazy wine that's it's amazing. Anything else you'd like to say about the 2009 Cotebonneville before we? Before I stop talking about it, but I'm going to continue smelling this for the rest of the video. I'm just saying. Well, I'll just throw out there, it is on our website then, because cool. Like you said, we do hold on to these wines a long time. So go check out the website and get yourself some.
Cool. Awesome. Good stuff. Cool. So yeah, you're an interesting cat. So you've had an interesting career. You have received an engineering degree from Northwestern University, and then worked overseas, then came back, got a master's degree from UC Davis with viticulture and enology. Knowing how a scientific or engineering mind works, because I spent many years in the physics program at ASU and understand physics and science. I'm very math and science oriented, and that's how my brain works. Do you feel that your science background has helped you in any way in thinking a bit about the way you make wine?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I mean, I think at its most simple level, an engineering degree is teaching you how to think in a way that is, how do you solve problems with data and information, and then how do you apply that in very actionable, practical ways to solve a problem. And often, when I was at Case New Holland, especially when I was still working with the Fiat Group, I worked on systems. I worked on complicated systems, global production supply chains, and nothing in winemaking happens in and of itself. You change one thing over here and it changes, the little cascade of things that work all the way down. So understanding how things work together and thinking in a systems concept is, an engineering degree is priceless from that standpoint. And then I think the other thing that people always say about wine is this combination of art and science. And some people are very much on the science theme and some are on the science side. Some people are very much on the artistic side. But if you look at all of the great artists, they all knew how to draw, right? I mean, the difference between Picasso and a 3-year-old is that Picasso actually has technical competency, or had technical competency, and that's why we don't take the 3-year-olds and sell them artwork, and we hang them on the refrigerator. We don't sell them at auction. And I mean, you can have this wonderful vision, but if you don't have the competency and the technical knowledge to be able to execute it and execute consistently, I think there's a gaping hole. Like you need to know what to do to elevate the wines. As you were saying, you keep the rubies and the diamonds separate and elevate them, but you have to know how. And a lot of time, with fining and filtration, for example, we don't do those things, but that doesn't mean I don't have to know how to do them. As a competent professional winemaker, I have to know how to run a fining trial. I have to know what fining elements you use for what things. But that doesn't mean that I don't have any judgment about whether or not, and the fact that I don't have to use them. So you couldn't write things and not have the basic concept of correct sentence structure and capitalization and punctuation and verb conjugation. You have to be technically competent at a certain level, because otherwise people wouldn't understand what words you're trying to convey if you don't know how to put them together in a sentence in a way that makes sense. And
for sure,
science is how the natural world works. And since fundamentally we're been growing grapes, we're doing plant biology, and it's plant biology and geology and microbiology and chemistry and physics, and it's all of the sciences all together in this one specific thing is it's helpful. The more science you know, just the better it is, and the more interesting it is. I was listening to a podcast with a geologist talking about what different mineral compositions in different soils and different rocks specifically, and that's one of those aha moments when I linked it to the chemistry of, the plant biology of what's happening with berry physiology at ripening, connected to what's happening in the wines as the wines are aging. And I'm like, oh, no wonder you need volcanic. No wonder our wines have such great pH and they're so long lived and they age forever. It's because of the mineral composition of the soil. And when you can link all that together and you have this great understanding, it helps to be able to convey, to do what you're doing.
For sure. That's the professor from University of Washington, yes?
Whitman College, Kevin Pope.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's very interesting, for sure.
Yeah, that was the Levy Dalton podcast that I first heard him talking about that.
Sure, that was a good one. So what's next for you? Do you ever want to work with a different varietal in Dubrul, or is there anything you've wanted to play with as far as different technology, or perhaps add another bottling to the line, to the range?
Well, we did just release our Cab Franc, our first ever Cab Franc. And I mean, people have said for years that we have the best Merlot in Washington. And so there's, I've toyed with the idea of making a varietal Merlot. And I think the beauty and the challenge of the Cotebonneville brand is that the wines are very classic, they're very traditional, they're very consistent. And that's a challenging sandbox to be able to play in, because there's a lot of constraints to that, which are wonderful. But the beautiful thing is, when we opened our tasting room in the historic train station, we said, old buildings, the Cotebonneville estate is on the bottles of the Cotebonneville label. The train station is another cool old building. Cool old buildings need their own labels, and it has to be different because the building is different. The concept should be different. So our train station label, which is our second label, is kind of my chance to play. So that's where I play around with different varietals and different blends. We did a Cab Merlot Syrah blend, a classic Washington blend, which would never be, it's not classic in the grand concept of wine, but it's pretty classic for Washington. So we can try things like that. And I think the challenge with new varietals is I'd have to find another vineyard, or I'd have to plant something. So I'm not going to commit to what varietal is next outside of the 6 that we already grow. But I do think there's potential for different expressions and different technologies and different things that we can do within that second label. And
so
just
as
like much as making
varietal that you say, wow, I really enjoy drinking this. It's some obscure varietal from an island somewhere elsewhere. Like I would drink this every single, because I really enjoy it. And like whatever that varietal might be, or if there is such experience for you, would you ever consider planting it or growing it?
Oh, well, then I'd have to plant Sauvignon Blanc and see if I could find a spot that would make like a Sancerre equivalent, because I'm a weirdo in December when it's dark outside and it's cold. I like high acid whites, and so that's why the closest thing to a high acid white that we make is our dry Cab Franc rosé. And so I always squirrel away a couple bottles and to pull out in the doldrums of the winter, because rosé is sunshine in a glass, and I like to pull them out in the middle of winter when I need some sunshine. And if I was going to make something else, the one thing that I would do, like a Sancerre Sauvignon Blanc, like really fresh, crisp, bright acidity, just easy to drink, and I need more sunshine in my glass this time of year. And I'm out of rosé, so I might have to plant something. But
oh no, that sounds like a problem.
But don't tell my dad; he'll get mad at me.
Okay, awesome. So where do you see the brand in 20 years?
That is an interesting existential question, from the standpoint that right now the brand is very much my mom, my dad, and myself. And in 20 years, if mom and I are still doing all the cellar work, I'll be surprised. But as much of what we have now that we can evolve and grow into, but keep the same, I would be thrilled, because I love the fact that we're a family owned, operated. We don't, like I said, we don't have cellar hands. I'm the lab tech. I'm the cellar hand. I'm the lab tech. I'm the bottling line. I'm the quality control. And I
see what happens. You get an engineering degree, like.
You just end up with all the jobs, all the things.
Yeah,
and
all the hats. That's what happens.
But doing this with my family is so special. Doing it at a small scale where we get to touch everything is really special. There's a lot of winemakers who just come in and taste tanks and leave, which being a cellar hand is hugely important, because that's where you get all the sensory information in a much more rich setting than just up in a clinical tasting room, tasting through samples. And so as much as we can continue to be all about, I mean, we will continue to be all about a sense of place. That's who we are. That's what we do. And I think that's, what else, where do you want to go from there, really? If you have a Grown Cru site, that's what you want to be. And as much as we can keep it small and family and focused on quality and exceptional wines that are compelling and interesting, like those are the, well, however that looks in 20 years, that's who we want to continue to be. I just, you know, I've only got 3 nieces and 1 nephew, and they're all under the age of 10, and so one of them has to at least get to be 21, so they're legal to come help me out.
Or at least 3 more years, and then they can start making wine at 13, like you did.
My niece actually made wine at 5. I got her some grapes. She was super excited.
There you go.
I am the best aunt ever. She was like growing crystals. We put red food coloring in there. It turned into wine diamonds. Like,
nice.
You know, science is fun. It's delicious.
Legit. It's awesome. So, is there anything you'd like to say to someone who wants to be a winemaker, like your nieces or someone coming out of, you know, Walla Walla College or UC Davis? You know, what advice would you give them from learning what you now know?
I would say that the wonderful thing about wine that everybody should do, and for everybody listening, do it before you're 30, because from a visa standpoint, at 30 you get old. Go work somewhere around the world, get global context, because when things change, when things are different, when things, like whether it's the environment is different, and so you have that context to respond because you have the experience. I mean, education is critical, but experience is also super helpful. And it's not hard to go work a harvest in other parts of the world. And it's important to have, it's fun and it's important to be able to look at the other great regions of the world and know where you fit. I mean, knowing what your neighbors are doing is important, but knowing what my friends are doing in Australia and in France and in Italy and in Mendoza is also helpful. And it gives you a much broader network and range of just knowledge and skills and people to ask questions to. And so I think that combination of, and keep learning and tasting wine, because, you know, the homework is hard, but right? Somebody's got to do it.
The struggle is real, let me tell you.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I was, my neighbors are like, what are you doing? And I'm like carrying like 3 cases from my car to my place. And they're like, what are you doing? It's like, homework. Like,
yeah. But you know, it's multitasking, because some people have to go to the gym to lift weights. I just picked up boxes,
exactly, right?
grapes. Like, it's great. It's really efficient.
Right. Awesome. Well, Kerry, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you.
I know that Instagram likes to kick us off about that hour or so mark. So just a few more questions before we go. Is there anything that you'd like to, you know, achieve, you know, in your career before you retire one day?
I want to be able to go to New York and see Washington wine on every wine list of every restaurant that is open up again and we're dining inside. I want people in London and in New York and in Hong Kong to know that Washington wine is a thing. I want them to know that Washington wine is something they need in their cellars. And, you know, I'm not going to do this on my own, obviously, but if I look at it takes all of us to put Washington on the map. The industry is so small and it's growing so quickly, but these wines deserve to be known. I mean, if nothing else, those people deserve to know about Washington wine because they're missing out on it if they're not drinking it. And so I want to be part of putting Washington on that, bringing it up to the global scale where the grape quality already is, the wine quality already is, but I think the recognition isn't there yet. So by the time I'm done, it will be.
I I think you're absolutely correct. So I actually had a really interesting conversation with Christophe Baron about Washington wine. Every time he goes overseas, he'd be like, "Oh, I'm a winemaker in the States." A lot of the people would say, "Oh, you live and work in California." No. Oh, Oregon. No. Where? Washington. Where in Washington? Walla Walla. Where's that? It's like Washington. It's not necessarily a global. It's not on the global kind of mainframe yet. Like it's available a lot of places, but I think once the world of wine is able to try Washington wine at great depths, they'll understand how amazing it is. There's clearly potential there, and for a relatively young wine growing state, it's off to an amazing start. And I don't think Washington wine has ever been better than it is right now, and it incrementally keeps getting better and better and better and better. So
I'm sorry I sent you an older vintage then.
Right.
You know, that was before we learned how to grow grapes and make wine. It was 11 years ago. Things have changed.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. I've just been here smelling this. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. You know, just looking at the color, no one would think that this is, you know, over a decade old because it's still vibrant. You know, that once it starts to get that kind of brownish, kind of like brick orange, like, you know, for some varietals, that's a good thing. But this is still absolutely beautiful. And I had a thought when I was kind of preparing for today. I was thinking about, like, you know, who are some of the important producers that the world should absolutely know about as far as Washington? And I was thinking about, well, let's look at, like, you know, who's in the top echelon of producers. So Andrew Will, doing some great work. Bet's Family Wine, fantastic stuff. Cayuse, Cole Solari, DeLille, Gramercy Cellars, Horsepower, K Vintners, Leonetti, Long Shadows, No Girls, Ryan Van, Upchurch, Colcita Creek, and Cotebonneville. Solid juice. Super good.
And honestly, of that list, at least a half a dozen of them do or have bought fruit from Dubrul Vineyard. So,
well, it makes sense.
Recurring themes in there.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, Kerry, thank you so much. It's been an absolute blast. I know that that this will be the final chat for me this year because 2020 is finally coming to an end. And it looks like with Napa shutting down, I don't know if the office will still be feasible to come to. So I'm just going to call it for the year, and then I'll be back in January. But before I go, do you have any parting thoughts or last words for us today?
Everybody should drink more Washington wine. And by the way, it's antiviral, so it's medicinal. You should drink this. It's good for you.
Nice.
Happy holidays. Thanks for having me. Happy holidays. Happy New Year, because
Happy
we
holidays.
apparently won't
Happy New
see
Year.
you in this context until 2021.
Right.
But this is fun.
Yeah, it was super fun. So thank you so much for joining me today. I know you're incredibly busy. And thank you again for sending the 09 special treat. Thank you very much. It was delicious. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. Until then, be safe, drink well, and be kind to others. Cheers.
Thanks. Cheers.